Here is everything we learned over the first half of 2026, going over some of the tournaments you may have forgotten about, the storylines, roster moves, pretty much everything that happened over the first half of this year. And well, the first tournament we had was Blast Bounty 2026 Season 1. The group stage of this was all online, so it was a little scuffed, but still some incredibly interesting results. For starters, a Tier 2 team, Monty, who was ranked number 41, upset the number 7 ranked team in the world, Na'Vi. At this time, we kind of thought that Na'Vi just kind of stunked and maybe Monty was pretty decent, but we would later go on to find out that Monty was just a very, very good team. Na'Vi wasn't really at peak form just yet. We also had the Perfecto IGL era. Oh, brother. Their first game was against Vitality, so, you know, they got bent over. We saw Paravision with the newly added Zwei, who beat Ents, an OG with a newly acquired Cadian, a Flamus, and an up-and-coming Tier 2 team a lot of people thought fairly highly of in Foot. It was incredibly close on both maps. They were both 13-11, but Foot did pull through. The start of 3D Max's decline as they played number 40, ranked team in the world, Inner Circle, and lost kind of decisively on a map 3 decider, Dust 2, where they lost 13-6. At this point, 3D Max was ranked number 12 in the world, and I mean, it was just downhill from this point onwards. Also, we had Eyeballers upset FaZe. FaZe were ranked as the number 5 team in the world heading into this after their Budapest final run, and Eyeballers number 34, JW is back in Tier 1, baby, the GOAT, opping IGL. And well, as we know today, this is more of an indictment on how poorly FaZe were playing, not really how good Eyeballers was playing. Not to say Eyeballers is bad, but you know. We also got to see Astralis with Ryu and Fuzi play against Fnatic. They were favored here, so it wasn't a super impressive win. They would definitely need a little bit more time to cook with this roster for us to really know what they were capable of. And then in stage 2, it went mostly about how you would expect. The one big upset was Gamer Legion beating Aurora, but Aurora had just added Soulfly. It was an online game, and it was Aurora, so, you know, sometimes this will just happen. I'd say the most interesting part of this stage was Foot versus Furia, because at the time, Furia was the number 2 ranked team in the world, and Foot number 27, and this series was incredibly close. Coming down to 3 maps, and on the 3rd map, Dust 2, Furia barely squeaked by 13-11, and while a lot of the community was fairly high on Foot, it looked like they were already competing with Tier 1 teams, and so breakout team of the year candidate Foot had started the year very strong. But maybe an even better breakout candidate team this year was Paravision, as they had beaten Astralis in dominant fashion 2-0, and were on their way to the playoffs. Then in these playoffs, Paravision went on to shock everyone by beating Donk and Spirit. A pretty cool storyline, because Zwei was just kicked from Spirit, as they had brought back Magix's IGL and Zontix, and well, he just had his revenge match against his old team, proving that maybe it wasn't necessarily all his fault that Spirit hadn't really worked out. And after this, they would then go on to beat Furia, the number 2 ranked team in the world, and Falcons, the number 3 ranked team in the world, in the finals. This was an incredibly impressive showing for Jame and Paravision. Coming out here as a Tier 2 team and winning the first S-tier tournament of the year is just unbelievable, and he showed that he still had it. Along with this, Noda looked like a potential breakout player of the year candidate, as he had dominated in the finals against Falcons and won the tournament EVP, while Nico won the MVP in a loss, partially because of his great performance against Vitality in the semis, where Falcons actually upset them and won. There was maybe a little bit of doubt. Was the Vitality era officially over? I mean, Falcons had come out here and toppled them, but as we would come to see, that was more of a one-off. You know, surely Falcons couldn't do this again. Hey, cutie patootie. It's me, Garmour. Guys, if you would like to support me and what I do here, check out the long-term sponsor of the Garmour YouTube channel, SkinSwap. SkinSwap is the #1 place to trade your Rust or Counter-Strike skins for new ones where you can instantly upgrade your inventory. And if you use my code Garmour, you can get up to $50 on a free skin and a 3% lifetime selling bonus. And now you can also easily buy skins off the Chinese marketplace for cheaper prices than you ever could on the Western marketplaces. I truly think this is the best feature on any skin trading website, but if you are looking to sell, you can sell your skins for crypto, PayPal, Venmo, and a bunch of other withdrawal methods. Along with this, SkinSwap has a vault system now, which makes it the most rewarding skin trading website. And of course, and don't forget the giveaways. And I think that's it. Thank you to them, thank you to you guys, and back to the video. After this, we would have one of the biggest tournaments of the year, not named the Major, and that would be IEM Krakow. Now, here at Krakow would be a bunch of the same storylines. Paravision started in stage 1, but finished with a 1-4 finish, easily making stage 2. Along with this number 10 ranked team in the world, G2 easily made it. 3D Max made it through, looking like maybe they weren't falling off, and maybe a surprise team in NRG also took one of the top 4 spots. This was an OC Life tournament, something we would never, ever see again. Nothing even close. Then the other 4 spots were taken by Astralis, Bertram Clyde Gaming, who were kind of an interesting-ish roster. In this past roster mania, they had signed the Saw Core of Crazy, Muterus, and Aragorn, but this team was really strange, having, you know, 3 Portuguese players and then Simple and Electronic. And while there were some highs here, Simple and Electronic both looked like they could still shoot. You know, there were some internal issues that looking like they were starting to bubble up. And then along with this, Foot would continue to impress, making it through. And finally, Aurora over Pain, who did have a new roster adding Pariah Jr. and VSM, but so far we're kind of looking meh. Then in the main stage, you kind of got about what you would expect. In Group A, G2, Spirit, and Furia would make the playoffs, and in Group B, Vitality, Aurora, and Mouse would make the playoffs. Now, because this tournament was stacked and every single good team was here, we're of course going to have some teams that disappointed. The Mongols did not win a game with Cobra, who was added in this past roster mania to officially replace Senzu, but at least at this point, it wasn't looking great so far. Na'Vi once again did not make the playoffs, but they did beat Paravision in their first game, and then lost to Spirit and Furia. I mean, what are you gonna do? Speaking of Paravision, they didn't win a game in Group A, losing to Na'Vi and Astralis. So while looking like the breakout team of the year, they also kind of looked incredibly inconsistent potentially. But then again, you know, most JAME teams are. Astralis looked incredibly strong here. Ryu and Fuzi both looked like phenomenal additions. Stare was playing well, Yabi was playing well. At this tournament, Astralis genuinely looked like one of the better teams in the entire world, and their new roster seemed to be decently exciting. But they did unfortunately lose to the number 2 ranked team Furia in the lower bracket final. Once again, what are you really gonna do? Then in Group B, Bertram Clyde Gaming would not win a series, losing to Vitality and also FaZe. They weren't expected to win either of these. They were playing 2 top 6 ranked teams in the world at the time. They didn't look great against them, but at the end of the day, they were just outclassed. Simple did still have a few good moments, and so there was a little bit of a hype train still behind Simple. With him on this team, even if it did look scuffed, they would still be somewhat entertaining. FaZe would lose in the lower semis to Mouse, but they would get blown the fuck out, losing 13-5 and 13-6, continuing a slightly concerning start to the year for the Budapest Major Final losers. And well, Falcons wouldn't make it, losing to Mouse in the lower bracket finals, but it was an incredibly close and entertaining series. A series which, honestly, Falcons kind of choked away. They had a couple 5v3s that they lost, and so this would continue, you know, the Falcons choking, losing 5v3s, Falcon screenshots, memes. And so despite them having an incredibly talented roster, it just looked like at this point they could not put it all together yet. Then in the playoffs, the number 1 and number ranked 2 teams would meet in the final, Furia and Vitality, and Vitality would unfortunately remind all of us that they're easily the best team in the world, winning 3-1. Zywoo would win MVP, and well, they were looking to continue to get their era back on track. BGL Cluj-Napoca, unfortunately not very much to talk about here. Vitality continued to bust my balls and easily win the entire thing, not dropping a map in the grand final against Paravision, who looked like they were back. They took one tournament off after winning one and were back in the finals of the next one, but yeah, it wasn't enough. A Flames 1.48 dropped on their head in the final. Not really much else to say, to be honest. Na'Vi finally made a playoffs where they lost to Mouse in the quarters. 3D Max went 0-3, continuing their decline. Heroic went 1-3 here, and I haven't talked about them that much. At this point, they were having a bit of a problem with their roster. They were in a bit of a pickle. You see, their upper, Elkarin, was having brutal visa issues. Was it his fault or was it the organization's fault? It sounds like it was more of the orgs. And so they would have to bring back their recently benched player in Youngster to now be their main opper. And I mean, in his defense, he wasn't that bad. He actually was kind of hitting a couple clips so far this year. But overall, not a great situation to be in. Would you rather have him or Brokey so far this year? It's really up in the air. I feel like 80% would choose Youngster there, though. Speaking of Brokey, FaZe go 1-3 here, continuing to be mega poop. They're the winners of the Poop Olympics. Bait was also here and went 1-3. At this point, Bait were an incredibly frustrating team because they seemed to be pretty good, but they just couldn't figure out the opping position. They tried Segukawa earlier in the year, and he lasted about one event, and then they decided to join Sizzy from Spirit Academy right at the end of January, and I mean, so far he didn't look great, but he was an incredibly raw prospect still. He would need some time in Tier 1. I mean, he was only 16 when they signed him, so this was not, not overly concerning. It was just going to be a developmental project at this point. Astralis kind of disappointed, not making playoffs after their incredibly impressive run at Krakow. G2 missed playoffs, Foot missed playoffs, but then again, like the teams that did make the playoffs, Vitality, Falcons, Mouse, Furia, Mongols, Navi, Aurora, and Paravision, you know, like that's kind of about what you would expect anyways. This was also kind of a Cobra Zera breakout tournament. He didn't do anything insane, but he looked better than he had been, and in the quarterfinals against Furia, he posted a 1.34 against them, being the highest rated player on Mongols, so maybe he could decently replace Senzu, and Mongols would continue to be a very good team, but of course, you know, we would have to wait and see. ESL Pro League Season 23 was a very interesting event because Vitality wasn't here, so who was gonna step up and win this bad boy? Well, let me tell you what, it wasn't gonna be Paravision, because these fuckers were bouncing event to event, doing the complete opposite of what they did the tournament before. They go one on, one off, one on, one off. They got cooked here in the first stage of this entire event. Now, this part was also online, so I guess you don't want to be too harsh, but even still, so was Blast, and they won that. But yeah, they started off 2-0 here as well, and then lost 3 straight series against Legacy, Monty, and Heroic. Paravision, at the end of the day, should win every single one of those series, but they didn't win one. Who else was here? Every single NA team got stomped, unfortunately. M80 1-3, Passion UA, I guess technically weren't NA, but I'm counting them 1-3, and Liquid 2-3. Ooh, speaking of these teams, Passion UA, incredibly exciting team during this time. They had one player from every goddamn continent. JT from Africa, Nick X from North America, Try from South America, Senzu from Asia, and Kavem from Europe. Everywhere besides Australia and Antarctica. A very cool team, a very gimmicky team as well. And well, at least for starters, it didn't look like it was gonna work. But hey, man, at least Senzu looked still pretty good. Then in stage 2, that's when all the big boys showed up. FaZe continued to stink, going 1-3. Furia surprisingly did not make the playoffs, but even if they did make the playoffs, I'm pretty sure this was the tournament Fallen wouldn't have been able to attend the playoffs, so it's not like it really mattered. 3D Max did not make the playoffs. G2 did not make the playoffs, which was kind of concerning because at this point we had a couple of tournaments of G2, I guess. I don't know if they're underperforming or if they were just kind of a decent-ish team at the time. You know, they did make the playoffs of Krakow, but now it was 2 tournaments in a row where they completely missed the playoffs, and you would argue that, those 2 tournaments should be easier than Krakow to make the playoffs. And then we finally had Foot lock in and make the playoffs of a Tier 1 event. Looking now at this point like they maybe even could take the crown from Paravision. We also had Astralis once again looking good, making the playoffs. Mouse, Spirit, Aurora, Mongols, Navi, and maybe the biggest surprise, Legacy, who are looking very solid after replacing their old IGL Lux with the beloved, beautiful man himself, Art, with his iconic plays of turning his brain off and just running those fuckers down, man. He never gave a shit. Then here in the LAN playoffs, something interesting would happen. Foot would beat Mouse in the quarters. This could now be marked as their official breakout tournament. And well, what some people were calling around this time that actually ended up happening was kind of a Mouse fall off. You can only consistently be great and not win tournaments for so long before internal issues start to arise. And I mean, yeah, they had just lost to Foot, who wasn't ranked in the top 10. This was supposed to be the tournament for Mouse to win if they were going to win anyone, and they had just been knocked out in the quarters. Then Astralis upset Spirit in the quarters as well. So far up to this point, Spirit had looked brutal. I'm just going to say it how it is. With Magic's IGL, with Zontix back in the roster, they just didn't look good. Tanir wasn't playing well. It looked like even Donk was underperforming. Shira, the team just kind of looked very, very messy at this point. But when anyone is transitioning into a new caller, you have to give them time. So at this point, you can't raise the alarm bells quite yet for Team Spirit. And well, the finals here would go on to be Navi versus Aurora, something we had seen before at ESL Pro League Season 20, but at that point, Navi was the best team in the world, and Aurora was Eternal Fire. And well, in similar fashion to that ESL Pro League, Navi would once again win this one in 4 maps with a wonderful masterclass. Then we have Blast Open Rotterdam, an event where FaZe would lose to Ty Lue to get knocked out of the tournament. But like for the most part, what you would expect to happen here happened. Na'Vi Aurora made the playoffs. Paravision Vitality made the playoffs. And well, sadly, Furia and Falcons had to play in the lower final. And while it was a very good series, Falcons would come out on top of this one. And then in the lower bracket of Group B, it would be Mongols versus Spirit, and Spirit's struggles would continue. Probably the biggest red flag from this was Mouse, who were continuing to kind of be in a free fall after losing to Foot. They lost to Mongols in their opening match, and then in their second match, lost 2-1 to 9Z, and well, came out of this tournament in last place. Looking back at it, maybe that loss to 9Z wasn't so bad, but even still, the Mouse fall off at this point was very clear. At this point, maybe it's time to pop a bottle of champagne, but we really couldn't get that excited because Vitality won this whole tournament. Wasn't close, didn't lose a map in the final. Yay. Next we have Rio. You know, what you would expect to happen happened. Vitality, Falcons, Spirit, Furia, Mouse, and Na'Vi all made the playoffs. But can you god diddly dang believe it? Falcons actually beat Vitality in the upper bracket final. So once again, it looked like if there was a team to save us, it would be Falcons. Spirit looked a little better, finally making another playoffs, beating G2 in the lower bracket finals. A G2 who had recently made a swap with Liquid. Liquid now had mobs because they were so dog shit they couldn't qualify to the major unless they made this swap and transferred to an NA team. And Nertz was brought back under the leadership of Saw, who maybe could save him. But then again, your time on Liquid doesn't count, so surely Nertz would play better here than he did on Liquid at the very least. G2 also didn't have Hunter here. They had an Academy stand-in, so, you know, the fact that they even made the lower finals here was pretty impressive. Liquid with mobs continued to stink shit, coming out in last place. Passion UA unfortunately also continued to stink shit, but they also had a stand-in with Fang in for Senzu, so once again, can't really count it, I guess. Legacy also didn't win a match here, losing to Mouse and Hotu, which was kind of surprising after they made the playoffs of ESL Pro League, but you know, at the end of the day, kind of similar to Paravision, I guess. Maybe that's just what art-led teams are. Have a fairly high ceiling, but also a decently low floor. Mouse were back, I guess, finally making another playoffs, but they got stomped by Spirit in the quarters. A Spirit who is looking better than they had all year at this point, especially Tanir, who finally looked like he had arrived, but of course they got stomped by Vitality in the finals. It doesn't ever end, man. Just someone save me from my misery. Blast Rivals Fort Worth. A very interesting event as there were only 8 teams in total here, but one of them is Vitality, so you might as well just all give up before it even starts. The two main storylines here are FaZe actually looked good after losing Kerrigan and adding Netanyahu. You know, these fuckers made it all the way to the semifinals. You know, this was without a doubt their best showing of the year, and maybe there was some light at the end of the tunnel for FaZe, maybe. I don't know. Does anyone else find it weird that they add Netanyahu? And only then do they look good and make a playoffs? There's something fishy going on here. I don't know. Gamer Legion also had a very, very good showing with Snacks as the team's IGL, also making it to the semifinals, where they got stomped by Vitality, who would meet Na'Vi in the grand final. Na'Vi had slowly been heating up throughout the year, and after kind of a scuffed start, I think they were now without a doubt the second best team in the world. They just really couldn't get over the hump and beat Vitality, and well, here it would be no different. They couldn't even get a map against these fuckers, man. And that's despite starting Nuke up 11-1. Yep, they started Nuke 11-1 and lost. They didn't win a single map in this fucking final, man. Then we have 3 more tournaments, which are kind of strange. PGL Astana and IEM Atlanta happened at the same time, so all of the tier 1 teams kind of got split in 2. At Astana, we had a couple good storylines. Fisher College was here, the first ever Counter-Strike college team to make a tier 1 tournament. They did unfortunately go out 0-3 here, but what the fuck do you expect? Paravision went 1-3, only beating Fisher College, continuing to look suspect as fuck, just being quite literally one of the most inconsistent teams in all of tier 1, and well, tensions were starting to rise, especially with Dastan and some of his players. Surprisingly, Mongols failed to make the playoffs here, and the surprise team of the entire event may be in Magic, who was just some random ass tier 2 European team with just some fellas on it. Actually looked fairly impressive after going down 0-2 to then winning 3 straight series, where they then played another big surprise team this tournament in 9Z in the quarters. 9Z had beaten Paravision, Falcons, and Mouse to make the playoffs 3-0. Unfucking real run from them. But they unfortunately kind of choked in the quarters, losing to Magic. I mean, maybe not a choke, I don't know. It's kind of a weird game, like 9Z and Magic. Surely with 9Z's showing they were favored. But at this point, you know, they were two up-and-coming teams. So a very fun game. But this went about how you would expect it to. Spirit ran through their side of the group. Falcons ran through their side of the group. And then Spirit and Falcons would meet in the final. But this was no normal Falcons. Old Falcons would have lost to Furia in the quarterfinals here. One of the series of the year, by the way, in Falcons and Furia in that quarterfinal game. Insane series, incredibly close. There's something a little different about Falcons. They had a little goat on the squadron, a little 36-year-old fella named Kerrigan on the team, and it seemed like he was already locking these boys in. Because while, sure, he may have only been killing 3 people a game, there was kind of a different feel about Falcons. Like I said, in that Furia series with Kixin, I feel like 10 out of 10 times they choked that series and lose, but with Harrigan, they simply didn't. They locked in. They were big game players now, it seemed. Big game players until the final where they got butt-fucked by Spirit. It wasn't that bad. It was pretty close, but Falcons didn't win a map. Then over at IEM Atlanta, Gamer Legion continued their very impressive run, making it all the way to the playoffs, but because there were 2 tier 1 tournaments at the same time, their path to the playoffs was beating Pain in the quarters, who now had Safe instead of NQZ because he decided to bench himself for personal reasons, and then Legacy, who, you know, weren't a bad team, just their legacy. You know, if that's the team you have to beat to make the grand finals of a tier 1 event, I feel like you take that any day of the week. And then on the other side of the bracket, we had Na'Vi versus Vitality in the quarters, and you wouldn't believe it, Na'Vi won. I couldn't believe it myself when I saw it, man. It's true. Na'Vi finally gets a map over Vitality, and god damn it, they got 2 of them, man. They won 2-1. First 2 maps were incredibly close. A Wonderful masterclass. At this point, it's like just objectively true that Wonderful has been a top 5 opper at this point this year. He's been playing out of his mind. And then the team they have to play in the semis is BetBoom. Another surprise team here, and very similar to Legacy. You know, if BetBoom is the team you gotta beat in the semis, I feel like you take that any day of the week. They already beat Vitality, but in BetBoom's defense, they also beat Vitality with Flamus as a stand-in. Vitality at this point was looking a little shaky, and a part of that reason is they just weren't practicing going into this event. They're taking a break at this point, which I do get to, you know, protect your mental health and try and not get burnout, but at this point it looked like it may have been backfiring. But you know, it's just IEM Atlanta. I'm sure they didn't really care about it. What really mattered was the up-and-coming Cologne Major. Anyways, before we get into that, Na'Vi stomped Gamer Legion in the final, winning 3-0, and without a doubt cementing themselves as the number 2 best team in the world, and even at this point looking like maybe they were catching up to Vitality. Then we have CAC. I'm not gonna go too in depth with this tournament. You know, Bertram Clyde Gaming was here, but by this point their roster just completely imploded. You know, who would have guessed the Saw Core and Simple and Electronic wouldn't work. Now they had their analyst standing in Skrunk and Senzu. Okay, they still had Crazy from the old Saw Core, but you could tell, you know, he didn't have much longer on this team. In the playoffs here would be Bait, Mouse, Legacy, Mongols, Falcons, and MIBR. Some very exciting teams, I won't lie. It looked like Sizzy at this point was improving on Bait. You know, MIBR in the semis with LNZ, Klim, and Insani was a pretty fun core. But in the finals, as you would probably expect, you have Falcons and Legacy. And unfortunately for Falcons, just like their last event, they would lose and come in second place here. Something the team was all too familiar with at this point. This leads us to the Cologne Major, and my god, bro, were we eating good with this thing, man. For starters, in stage 1, you immediately have one of the most popular 03 picks, Thunder Down Under, upset MIBR, and in their elimination game would have to play FlyQuest, which, you know, hey, script writers cooked with that one, okay? Old FlyQuest core versus new FlyQuest core. Old FlyQuest core would get stomped. Probably why they're the old FlyQuest core. Along with this, we got to see Big Clan, a team I had been incredibly excited about. Blame F, the GOAT. You know, back in a tier 1.5 team, you have Grix, who's an exciting player, and it would come down to a 2-2 game against NRG. A series they would look to easily win after taking Dust 2, but then they choked on Nuke, barely losing in overtime 16-12, and then going down 12-0 on map 3 Mirage, and oh my god, they won. They won and they were down 12-0. Are we fucking serious? The worst choke in Counter-Strike Major history. We just watched that shit with our own 2 eyes, man. The teams that would go through are BetBoom, Betboom, Bait, M80, MIBR, Gamer Legion, FlyQuest, Big, and Tai Lu. And then in stage 2, you get the highest rating in major history in a stage. Donk posted a 2.27 here. Fucking unbelievable. This was also without a coach, and instead a stuffed animal frog named Yab Yabbage. Yab Yabbage storyline goes hard as fuck, by the way. Foot were continuing their breakout year, going 3-0. And then G2 would make it through. Betboom would maybe surprisingly easily also make it out of here once again. They had 2 stand-ins in Flamus and Diladez as well. So it's like, you know, pretty damn impressive from them. You also had 9Z making it through here, Legacy, Monty, and Bait. Unfortunately, Big would not make it to stage 3, but I would say overall, for the most part, Big looked fine. They didn't look as good as I had wanted them to be honest with you, but still an exciting team at the end of the day. Then we get to stage 3 in the playoffs, where a couple interesting things would happen. Paravision went 0-3, continuing their very, very rocky second half of the first season of the year. Legacy went 1-3. Monty went 1-3, who looked very impressive before this, and proved to be one of the best tier 2 teams in the world during this time. Mouse went 1-3, but they were now a Xertian IGL-led team. They added Zealix as the team's main opener, and they had been playing the past few events with JL standing in, but now had Brolin instead because they had to. There was, you know, some roster issues, kind of forcing them to use him as a stand-in. So they were kind of a scuffed team going into this. Foot did look good enough to make the playoffs, but they're a very young team. The moment seemed too big for them, and they lost in the 2-2 game to Betboom, who was a, you know, a kind of a big surprise playoff team here. But they had looked very good in stage 1 and 2, so, you know, it makes sense. And then Navi and Mongols both went 2-3, barely missing out on the playoffs. I would say definitely the more surprising one here is Navi, because what did we learn from them? I think all we learned is that they probably need a roster move, honestly. They started the year kind of inconsistent, hit a hot streak where they looked very, very good. That was also where Wonderful was playing at his best, it looked like. And here, they unfortunately weren't good enough to make the playoffs in the biggest tournament of the year. And so while they still, you know, have a very good ceiling with their current roster, I feel like maybe they do gotta make a move to try and find a little bit more consistency, potentially. Then in the playoffs here, we had 9Z, Furia, Aurora, Betboom, G2, Spirit, Falcons, and Vitality. 9Z continued to be an exciting team, another breakout team of the year, kind of adding themselves to Foot and Paravision, and maybe even Betboom. I feel like we haven't seen enough from Betboom to really put him in that category just yet, but they did look good at Atlanta. They look good here, and I guess that's kind of similar to what 9Z did. So maybe they are in the same tier. Maybe the breakout teams of the year are 9Z, Betboom, Foot, and Paravision. Unfortunately, 9Z and Betboom both lost in the quarters. They were just outclassed by Furia and Aurora. G2 versus Spirit was one of the best series I have quite literally ever seen. We had, you know, that Magic's 1v4 and just an incredibly back and forth mirage. Heavy God looked like anchor of the year without a doubt, and G2 looks like a very exciting team, but they're kind of like Na'Vi in a sense, where like they do seem like they have a fairly high ceiling, but they're just kind of inconsistent. And then Falcons versus Vitality. We learned that Kerrigan is that fucking guy. One of the few teams all year who consistently showed they could beat Vitality. Obviously, they didn't always do it. They were one of the few who did. They come through and do it again here. And then Falcons continues to win, beating Spirit in the semis and beating Furia in the final. Phenomenal major here. And so what did we learn? Like I said, Kerrigan is that fucking guy, but I feel like that should have already been obvious. Did we really have to relearn that? We learned that biggest choker in Counter-Strike history is not Nico anymore and probably Nitro. Vitality era might be over. Magic's IGL and Spirit looks fucking swell now. The main thing we learned was Chopper really was a terrorist. And with Furia, while they did make a major final and still look like one of the top teams in the world, I think we learned that they might not have enough juice to win a major in Fallen's Last Dance here. We'll have to see what form they come into Shanghai with, but they just look very good, but maybe not good enough. We learned Na'Vi probably needs a roster move. We learned that Aurora can be good when they have a dead team buff. We learned that G2 ceiling is up here, while their floor is kind of down here, and that Heavy God might really just be the best anchor in the entire world. We learned that the mouse fall off really is real. We learned there are 4 new exciting breakout teams in 9Z, Betboom, Paravision, and Foot, and many of which will be coming into the second season with new rosters. We learned that while the phase run at Budapest was great, it really may have been the worst thing for that roster because they did not look good at all this year. We learned that Cobra's era is probably not enough to bring Mongols back to their former glory. We learned that Art maybe still has it We don't really know yet. We learned that maybe Snacks is a decent caller. Gamer Legion had some very high highs, but also some very low lows, especially at Cologne. Same thing with Astralis' new roster. It's still very up in the air if it's a good roster or not. Some very high highs, but some very low lows, especially like Gamer Legion at Cologne. We learned that maybe Sizzy is the answer for bait. And we also learned that Liquid is probably past saving and mixing 3 Portuguese players with Simple and Electronic might not be the answer. Hey guys, if you guys enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe a link, turn on notifications, and that's it from me. Have a good one.